Hey.
So I would just want you to start with introducing yourself, of who you are and what you do.
Of course. I'm Kasper Jörgensen. I'm the CEO and founder of Comply2. We're working with GDPR and trying to make it as easy and painless as possible for especially the small, medium-sized companies, where you can say the small, medium-sized companies usually don't have that much time, they don't have that much knowledge, and especially usually they don't have that budget to actually pay consultants or accountants to actually do the GDPR program.
Yeah.
So we thought,
Yeah, because up until now, I think it's been a lot of questions about lawyers and laws and regulations. So I gather you have a different view of this challenge.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think in general, what we have seen this year, and especially in the run up to the 25th of May, with the implementation of GDPR, we probably saw a bit like this Y2K-ish panic that everybody was running around selling anything GDPR-wise. I think you can even search on Google and you'll be able to find supply stores selling GDPR-compliant shredders or GDPR-compliant desks or something like that, which is sort of like, it just adds to the panic of this. And I'm sure that it can be find a lot of analysis from some of the big corporate organizations saying they used so and so much money on this.
Yeah.
And of course, it's
How did you end up with this? Sort of, what is your background?
Originally, I'm actually an auditor by trade, but have been working within actually large corporates in the past many years. Latest with the Danish shipping company Maersk, and I was actually part of a small group in that company doing procurement of fuel oil. And what we saw was that every time that we needed to do something in a new country, you end up calling lawyers and trying to figure out, so what are the rules in this country? What can you do? And this ends up being really, really expensive. Of course, being a huge conglomerate, you have money to do that. But if you're a small company, then what do? You want to get into a new market. You can't use $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 on lawyers and advisors just to figure out if you can go into a new country. It should be easy and accessible. And the same thing with GDPR. You can't just start out by just pushing a lot of money to a lawyer or a consultant to help you with GDPR, because in the end, the only one that knows what you're doing with your data is yourself. Yeah. So if you're sitting in a small company or a startup, is sort of what you need to know for GDPR is that you need to know what kind of data do you have, which kinds of systems do you put them in, and what do you actually use the data for. Mm-hmm. And I think these three questions, no lawyer or consultant can help you with, because you already know that. Then it's just a matter of putting it into the right to the right mapping, so that you can actually take that and say, I know what I'm doing with my data. I'm not afraid to show it, and basically just be transparent of what you're doing.
Yeah. So you decided to take on the challenge of doing something really hands-on that could be a helpful tool for small companies and startups and likewise.
Yeah. So we basically did an easy to use mapping tool. So basically, we just ask you questions, and then you reply what you use your data for and where do you have it. And then we can actually generate all these privacy documents that you need. So your different privacy policies, all these data protection agreements or data processor agreements you get with all your suppliers. And we make sure that you actually have a place where you can keep all this information, so that if the data protection board, they come and ask you questions, or you have customers ask you questions about what are you doing with privacy data, then you have one place where you can actually look into it and say, well, I have everything here. I have my documents. I have ongoing tasks. I have a risk assessment of what I'm doing with my data, and all down in a way of not speaking lawyerish, because speaking to a lawyer always tends to be very well, at least in Denmark, it tends to sometimes be very, very technical. I'm sure it's probably also true outside of Denmark. And in some ways, it's just a matter of actually communicating directly to the business owners than just communicating to other lawyers. I think privacy and GDPR, it's not something that's put in place for the lawyers to have a field day and make a lot of money. I'm sure they are, but in the end, it's a matter of you as a company being transparent towards your stakeholders and especially your customers, and showing them that you care about their data and that you're not afraid to show them what you're doing with their data. I think that's the whole sort of key of GDPR. It's actually transparency.
I know when we met in Copenhagen, because we met at the Creative Business Cup and talked a lot about the challenges of being like small companies and starting up and finding your way, because you need to sort out 1,000 questions alongside sort of the digital and GDPR side. Now we talked about this sort of where do I start, but it's also a matter of, well, I've started, I got all my documents in place, but then comes the next step. It's not sort of, you can't do the work once. You need to keep the work going. Yeah,
and I think it's actually one of the things we have a lot of discussions with our customers, because it's sort of like, so why do I need to have this? Because I already done it. And the thing is, GDPR is not something that you do. It's something that you do ongoingly in your company, because in the end, your company will change over time. You change the way you use data, and you change the way that you use systems, and you need to be able to show that you are compliant not only today but also on an ongoing basis. Yeah. I think actually one of the best examples of that is the first GDPR fine that has been given in Europe was actually given to a German company. They were doing a social media site, and they had everything under control. They had a lot of documents for what they did on GDPR, but still their site was hacked. And somewhere in their GDPR work, they actually forgot to protect the passwords of their users. So their user passwords were leaked. Yeah. And they actually reported that directly to the German authorities. The German authorities came and looked at all the things that they have done for GDPR. And in the end, they actually ended up with a small fine in the GDPR, in the GDPR world. They got a fine of 20,000 euros, but with the German authorities saying that the fine was that low because they actually could show that they had processes in place. They had actually set everything up. All their employees knew about GDPR. All their processes and procedures were in place. They had privacy policies. They had data processor agreements. But in end, obviously, data still leaked, so they had to get a fine. But that was taken into account by the authorities when they actually were measuring out the fine. So they got a hefty discount for it. So that's why they got off the hook for 20,000 euros, even though 20,000 euros is still quite a lot of money. Yeah. But that's sort of the first example of what's actually been given.
So it's sort of, you get everything in place, and then you have to sort of redo the work and see if anything changed. Have I changed my systems? Have I done anything else? And you, of course, always check around for seeing, okay, what's happening? What are the actual cases? Because it's a lot of talk about the it's not like the market, but it will be set some praxis by sort of legal cases and by the different branches. So now it's actually the first time we see legal cases coming up. Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see what actually cases comes up, and of course also how big are the fines going to be. Because I'm sure that there's going to be cases against Facebook and Google, and I think the European Commission will be happy to run those cases because these are the big corporates. Yeah. But in the end, for this actually to work, there's going to be cases against all sizes of companies. Yes. And especially today, and I think in the startup world specifically, there are so many companies that actually live off understanding data. And this is a huge part of your company. And this is sort of right now where the battle actually is going on, that if the politicians and the authorities, they want to ensure that there's transparency and that you do the right thing with your data. And I think actually all this panic that's been going on about GDPR, I think if you think about it in a way of saying, if this were your own data that you were giving up to a third-party company, would you be happy with the information that you're giving about what the data are used for? And I think if you can put yourself in that place and say, well, I'm okay with the story that the company is telling me about how the data is used, and that you're sure that you can understand it, then I think you are quite far in your GDPR journey. But it's still something that you need to take it into account all the time, because this is a moving target. It's not something that sort of you could just say, well, yeah, today this is okay, but it could be that in 6 months this is not okay anymore, because the consumer or your stakeholders actually change their viewpoint, and they actually need more from you. And I think that's where, even if you look at Facebook, then everybody's saying, Facebook is not me, it's so big. But in the end, it's a lot about transparency. Yeah. If they were to tell you what they're using your data for and where the data is coming from, I think you would trust them a lot more than right now it seems to be a black box, and that we have all these data on Facebook and we have no idea what's going on.
And you see the movements of sort of it getting fashionable to leave Facebook, and it's sort of fashionable to be sort of moving away from social platforms in a way.
Yeah, and I think if you run a company, you shouldn't do anything that you can't go out and tell your customer. So if you don't think you can take the data, go out to your customer saying, I'm using your data for this. If you think your customer will get angry about what you're using his or her data for, then should you really be doing it? I think you're doing your customer a disservice if you think that they just don't care about what you're doing with their data. I think being transparent and being able to have an open dialogue with your customers about what you're doing with the data, it is the right thing to do.
So if I got that, so this is actually you could say your best advice, sort of don't use data that you can't be transparent about.
Yeah, and make sure that you always are ready to be transparent, so that if someone calls, it's not like, I'm not really sure, I'll have to figure it out, because that would make everybody concerned already. But make sure you do your homework and make sure that you have it in place, because if you need to do all the work when the authorities call or the customers call, well, then you're behind already. So it's about doing your homework and making sure that you update it ongoingly. I think that's the best protection.
Yeah, and your idea with your company was basically to help people doing their homework in an easy, structured way, and to redo it and assess it sort of on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and then doing it in plain language that everybody can understand.
Yeah.
Because it is not that difficult. There might be some very extreme cases, but usually I would say that 80 or 90% of the companies, it is not that difficult. It's just a matter of actually sitting down, taking the time to actually make sure that you understand what data you have and what you're using it for. Because that's I think you might know it, but at least my experience from dealing with our customers is that everybody tends to know it, but they haven't really thought about it. So it's like, I have this data here and here, or I think the two most difficult questions for customers are usually, what are you using the data for? Yes. And when are you deleting the data again?
Yeah.
Because that's sort of, today we're just accumulating data because it might be nice to have at some point, and let's just save it. And I think a big part of GDPR is saying that, no, you're only allowed to have the data that you know you have to use. Don't collect a lot of data that you might use and that just keep it just because data storage is cheap. Yeah. No, and you don't need it anymore. Just get rid of it, and then that will limit your risk as well.
So no more data of who has a cat and who has this in a family and all these kind of stuff.
Well, if you can find a way to run a business basis that, then I think that would be perfect. But if you don't need it, then why store it? Because you're just accumulating personal data.
So what's the nerdiest thing you have learned now when dealing with GDPR?
Oh, the nerdiest thing. There are quite a lot of nerdiest things on when you're talking GDPR. Actually, I think probably one of the strange thing is that you get an appreciation for how the company is actually structured. What are the processes, and how does all your IT systems link together with your data? And all of a sudden, you tend to be sort of like an I've never really been an IT expert, but all of a sudden you talk about servers and all these kinds of things. It ends up being a bit nerdy. But in the end, it's just taking it all down and saying, yeah, well, what are you actually doing with the data?
Yeah.
Because an IT guy can talk you through a lot of very technical terms, and in the end, it's just sitting down and saying, yes, but what are we actually doing?
Yeah, back to content.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So thank you very much. Is there any sort of really sort of, if you're going to remember one thing more, remember this. If you would talk to someone who is about to start this journey down with,
I would say don't stop yourself just because you think this might be difficult. It's the worst thing you can do. Just start, and you might not get it 100% right, but it's 10 times better to have an 80% overview of what you're doing instead of just saying, "Nah, I'm hoping that the authorities won't ask, or I'm not getting into trouble." Just start, and then you have something. Then you can always take a discussion on some smaller parts if you're right or wrong. But it's a lot better than just saying, "Yeah, well, I haven't really thought about it." So I think the best advice is just get started. Just start doing something. And it might be that you think this is difficult and this is scary, but just get started. It's the best way to make sure that you get GDPR compliant. If not today, but then it's an ongoing process. So then you do it over time as you get wiser.
I think that's a great advice. So thank you very much for helping us out, making some clarifications around this.
Well, thank you very much for having me.